This was my disability check. My right to survive, torn apart, in front of my family, by the man who said, real men don't live off handouts. Broken heart. He didn't just rip paper. He ripped my dignity. Cara sin boca, niebla, and nobody stopped him. Fuego llorando. The envelope lay on the kitchen table, like any other piece of mail, but to me, it wasn't just paper. It was proof I still mattered, that even after the accident that took away my ability to work, I was still seen, by someone, even if it was only the government. He unfolded the check carefully, like it was made of glass. This was my disability compensation, the one thing that kept groceries in the fridge and lights turned on. It wasn't pity, it was survival. He didn't expect anyone else to understand it, least of all my father-in-law. Ever since the accident, he hadn't been subtle about his thoughts. That he'd given up, and I should be out there, doing something. He tried to shut it out, but that day, as I sat there with my coffee, he walked in without knocking. Again. Just pushed the door open like it was still his house, even though I paid rent now. I saw the check in my hand before I could fold it. His lips curled like he smelled something sour. Is that what you're proud of now? He scoffed. He clenched my jaw, not ready for the war I already knew was coming. It's a disability payment, I said, calm but firm. I earned it. He stepped closer, grabbed the paper without warning, and before I could stop him, tore it straight down the middle. The sound of paper ripping was louder than anything in the room. Real men don't live off handouts, he spat. My throat burned, but I stayed quiet. My wife saw everything from the hallway. Her eyes widened, but she didn't say a word. It was silent. Almost holy. He picked up the pieces of that paper, and everything I thought I had left of my dignity. Everyone said nothing. That was the strangest part. It wasn't just the shock of him ripping the check, it was the absence of sound afterward. My wife had frozen in the doorway. Her mother just kept stirring tea, pretending she hadn't seen anything. This wasn't the first time they made a scene like this. I remember last Thanksgiving, he yelled at me for not offering to carve the turkey like other capable men. He had to clench my fists under the table to stop myself from reacting. But this time felt different. This time, he crossed a line I couldn't unsee. My hands still held the shredded pieces of paper, more than just money, it was proof that I was being denied respect, even in my lowest season. He didn't say anything. Not yet. Saying something then would be turned the moment into a back and forth, and I was done putting out fires started by his ignorance. So I stood up quietly and walked out. Not dramatically. Used slow. Deliberate. He took the torn check with me and left the house, even though the air outside stunned my lungs and made walking more painful than usual. But I needed that pain. I needed to feel it to remind myself, I hadn't completely shut down. The noise in my head was loud, words I wanted to scream, things I wished I had said. But I knew better. If I blew up, I'd give them the story, the over-emotional, bitter, freeloader son-in-law. I wasn't giving them that headline. He sat in my car, seatbelt unbuckled, and just breathed. He looked at the check, 4 pieces now. Still legible. Still mine. But everything else? The trust? The respect. The silence told me I might be on my own. I couldn't shake the way my wife's eyes looked at me after it happened. Not angry, not even sad. Just, hollow. Like she was watching something shatter in real time but didn't know if she was allowed to care. Later that night, we sat in bed, backs turned, screens glowing, hearts dim. I thought maybe she'd bring it up. Ask me how I felt. Tell me it wasn't okay. But she didn't. Silence had started building a home between us long before the check was torn. Still, I needed to know what that moment meant. Did you see what your dad did? He finally asked, trying to sound steady, not defensive. She paused her scrolling. Yeah, she said, barely moving her lips. He was out of line. Then back to her phone. That was it. 3 hours later, she was asleep, and I stayed awake, staring into the Celine's unanswered questions. Maybe she thought looking away meant staying neutral. Maybe she didn't want to choose. But neutrality in abuse isn't peace, it's permission. And I realized right then, if I didn't make space for my voice, this family would happily silence it. My injury may have scarred my body, but her father, he wanted to scar my worth. That night, I wrote everything down. Every word. Every expression. Every detail. He says when he grabbed the check. The way no one flinched. De date. De time. Who was present? If no one else was going to hold him accountable, I would start by holding on to the truth. It was no longer about the check, the money, or even the insult. It was about what made a man, controlling others, or showing restraint when you're made small in front of everyone. He knew which one I wanted to be. I just wasn't sure if she'd stand beside that version of me. In the days that followed, the house felt like a museum of unspoken things. Flats clinked louder, hallway steps echoed longer, and my wife and I moved like roommates avoiding eye contact on the worst day of the lease. Her father didn't come by, and that was its own message. Not out of remorse, cowards rarely reflect, but because the tension made him uncomfortable, and avoidance was easier than apology. I stared at my phone once, wondering if they'd text. Maybe not sorry, but something. Even a dismissive "you get over it." Nothing came. Instead, my own inbox held a different kind of truth, an email from the Department of Disability Liaison Office, reminding me to confirm receipt of last month's payment, or request a reissue. Even the system had more concern for my well-being than my in-laws. At dinner that night, her mother finally broke the silence. Let's not let one bad moment ruin a family. One moment? One moment was all it took to set everything on fire. But that's how they always frame things, collapse as inconvenience, not consequence. He swallowed it, again. Trying to stay the calm one, the reasonable one. Because the moment I raised my voice, they fit their story. The angry, dependent in-law. He'd seen them box other people in before, siblings, cousins, colleagues. Righteousness was their inheritance. But there is a quiet rage that builds when truth is ignored. Ito inte scream. Ito commence. So I pulled out a notebook. Not for revenge, but for record. He listed each interaction from memory, every condescending comment, every public humiliation they buried under jokes. He didn't want to fight them. He wanted to protect myself next time they came swinging with words and smiles. And if a next time came, I wouldn't just record the damage. They know exactly what to do with it. The sound of the keyboard was the only thing steady in my life that week. He researched everything. Keywords like destruction of federal mail, disability harassment by family, and financial abuse in households. Every link led me deeper into a world I hadn't known I was a part of, a world where people with disabilities were shamed, silenced, and sidelined behind closed doors. He wasn't alone. That thought gave me strength. There were names for what he did. Even if he saw it as discipline or tough love, the law recognized it as something else entirely, interference. He made notes. Not emotional rants, but objective entries. What happened, when, who was present, and how it affected me financially. I stored it in both a notebook and in the cloud. No more casual conversations, no more letting things slide. He had to start treating this like a legal battle, even if I never ended up in court. This wasn't about getting revenge on him anymore. It was about protecting my ability to live freely. My dignity had a paper trail now. And I spoke to someone, a legal volunteer over a disability rights hotline. I thought he'd have to pay hundreds, but he listened, calmly, and gave me something I hadn't received from anyone in that house, clarity. It confirmed it. Tearing up that check, in public or not, wasn't just hurtful, it was unlawful. It didn't mean I had to press charges, but I had options. Choices. And power. He thanked him. He sat for a long time after that call, staring at the blank wall beside my desk, letting that truth settle. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't broken. The injury stole my job. It hadn't taken my rights. He just needed to stop leaving them unprotected in other people's living rooms. I didn't hire a full-time lawyer. Not yet. But I quietly found one. A young advocate who dealt specifically with disability justice and family conflict cases. We spoke for 20 minutes, it was just a consultation, but in those minutes, I learned more than I had in months of silence. He said I didn't need to wait for things to get worse before I acted. You're allowed to set legal boundaries, he said gently. Even with in-laws. Those words gave me a strange kind of peace. He didn't need to pick fights, shout, or slam doors to reclaim my rights. I just needed to document, prepare, and stand my ground. That night, I created a folder, simply, private, encrypted. Inside, a scanned copy of the torn check, a written statement of facts from that day, and the first 3 audio notes they made of comments from inside the house. I hadn't planned to record living room conversations, but after that incident, I started keeping my phone nearby. Not in secret with malice, just as protection. Clarity. Because memory fades, and they knew how to twist words better than anyone. He also wrote a letter. Not to send, just to see how it sounded. It was addressed to him. My father-in-law. It began with, "You don't have to like me." He didn't ask for that. But humiliating someone who's already trying to heal doesn't make you strong. It makes you cruel. He didn't send it. He wasn't writing for him. That letter was for me. To see my feelings on paper, to remind myself I wasn't crazy. That this pain had a source. And that someday, if it came to it, he'd know exactly who I was. Calm. Prepared. And no longer afraid of the man who once took pride in tearing what he never earned. Something changed in me after that call. Not just awareness, but momentum. I realized if I kept letting his actions define the rhythm of my life, he'd never rebuild anything stable. So, I took action, not against him, but for myself. I applied for a remote freelance job, part-time. Nothing huge. Used audio transcription for medical professionals. It didn't offer much, but the first time that PayPal notification came through, even for just $47.36, I felt something new, ownership. My own income, small but honest. No approval required. No shame. He started physical therapy again, though. Used stretches and balancing. Bodies break, but so do spirits, and only one had a treatment plan. The other had to be rebuilt from within. He carved out 2 hours a week for myself, one for therapy, one for creativity. He used to do photography before the accident. Nothing commercial, just moments captured through an old DSLR. He picked it back up. My wife noticed, but didn't say much. She floated around the house like a ghost trapped between family loyalty and personal understanding. I didn't blame her completely, but I didn't excuse her silence either. While she stayed tangled in fear and comfort, I was constructing a parallel life. Slowly. Quietly. Not in defiance, but in self-respect. And for the first time, I started thinking forward again. Not about big successes, or proving them wrong, but about emotional safety. Financial dignity. Distance, if needed. He realized I didn't need him to change. He just needed to stop needing anything from him, including his acceptance. That was the moment I moved from victim to survivor. Not because I'd forgotten what he did, but because I finally decided where my focus would go, not on hate, not on proving anything, but on the part of me he couldn't touch anymore. By week 3, the pressure began to build from within the house, not from him, but from her. My wife. The person I thought might stand next to me in the storm was starting to hint that the storm had overstayed its welcome. She started with small comments, like how awkward dinner had been the other night, how tense everything felt when her parents came up in conversation. He remained neutral. At first. But then it escalated. "It's old school," she said one night. That's just his way. He felt a flicker of anger. Not the yelling kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that fills your lungs when your pain is reduced to personality quirks. She didn't seem to understand that forgiveness has conditions. That accountability isn't optional just because the offender is family. "You think I'm overreacting?" he asked quietly. Her hesitation told me everything. "I didn't say that," she said, looking away, "but I think you're holding on to this like it was worse than it really was." Worse than it really was. Those words felt like a punch to my spine, silent and sharp. That's when I knew something deeper had cracked. Not just between her and me, but between what we believed respect looked like. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply made a new rule. I will not be in the same room with him again unless there is an actual apology and a promise of no more belittling. She blinked. "That's harsh." "No," I said. "It's healthy. Because going back to normal after being torn apart isn't healing, it's pretending." And they finally stopped pretending. Even if that meant sleeping next to someone who no longer knew whose side she was really on. I hadn't planned to share my story online. But something about the silence in the house, the rehearsed denial from my wife, and the slow feeling of being gaslit into believing this was all just some moment made me want to scream. Not at them, but into a space that might actually hear me. So I went to a support forum for disability and justice. No names. No real identifiers. Used the raw truth. He titled the post, "My father-in-law tore up my disability check in front of my family." They watched it happen. He wrote everything clearly, without rage. Used the facts. What he said. What they didn't say. What I felt. I almost deleted it before posting. But I didn't. And that one post exploded. Comment after comment filled my inbox. Dozens. 10 hundreds. People from all walks of life saying, this happened to me too. You're not wrong. You're not alone. One woman shared how her ex-husband's family flushed her medical documents down the toilet. A veteran said his brother told him taking disability was disgraceful to real soldiers. A teacher with chronic illness said her sister called her a burden to the free world. Every story put one more piece of power back into my hands. Not because of revenge, but because of validation. The internal, quiet gasp that says, you are not imagining this. The problem isn't your pain, it's that they refuse to accept it. I cried reading some of them. Hard sobs I hadn't released since the fall. When people believe you, even strangers, it changes something. For the first time, I saw my reflection through the comments. Not as broken. But as real. And in that digital crowd of empathy, I felt something my house had been missing for a long time, safety. One afternoon, without warning, he showed up at the house again. My father-in-law. My wife must have told him I hadn't let it go. Maybe she was hoping he'd come and make things right. He was folding laundry when I heard his voice in the hallway. Arrogant. Relaxed. Like nothing had happened. He stayed in the living room. Arms crossed. Not moving. He walked in, didn't they sit? Just stood there with a half-hearted smirk. Heard you're still upset, he said, like it was a joke. He didn't answer. My silence made people uncomfortable. That's why I stayed quiet, to watch them twist. He cleared his throat. Whatever, man. Sorry if you felt disrespected. He was just frustrated. You know how this stuff goes. He sighed loud, like he was the one exhausted by my behavior. Let's just not make it a big thing. That was it. The whole apology. An admission glued together with the words if and just, like the shame was mine to explain. He looked him in the eye and said, an apology without accountability is manipulation. It blinked like I had spoken a foreign language. My wife stood behind him, feeding. I could feel her hoping he'd smile, make peace, move on. But something deeper had shifted. That moment became very clear to me, not because I expected better from him, but because I no longer did. What he destroyed wasn't the check. It was the illusion that this family ever saw me as fully human. And sometimes, that clarity is its own gift. I didn't accept the apology. He didn't argue either. He just said, thanks for stopping by. Then I walked away. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. He felt powerful. Power doesn't always come from speaking louder. Sometimes, it comes from outgrowing the need to be heard by people who refuse to listen. By the end of the week, I had mailed an official form to request a reissued check. The process was slow, but the woman on the phone was kind, understanding, and not once did she question why I needed a new one. It took all of 6 minutes to do what my in-laws said wasn't worth talking about. Real systems, real people, took me more seriously than my own family. That realization was sobering and empowering. He updated my documentation, scanned voicemail transcripts, saved screenshots of follow-up messages, printed email confirmations. I wasn't prepping for drama, I was protecting peace. When you've been dismissed enough times, silence turns strategic, not bitter. He called my advisor again, the disability rights attorney. He asked if what happened could form legal grounds in the future, should boundaries continue being violated. He paused and then answered, yes. Nothing criminal, per se, unless the actions escalated. But it could be used to establish a pattern, especially if it began impacting financial safety, emotional health, or housing integrity. This isn't about threats, he reminded me. It's about leverage. And leverage is power. He nodded, quietly thankful. For once, there was a path forward that didn't involve screaming across dinner tables. Just record-keeping, boundaries, and an exit plan, emotionally and legally. I started sorting through mail more carefully, locking away important documents, removing any leftover input the in-laws had in our shared accounts. He checked the lease. My name was first. That changed something inside me. For years, I thought stability would come from making peace with people who hurt me. But now I realized, true peace comes from removing their power to hurt you again. It wasn't a revenge. It was reinforcement. Quiet, precise, legal reinforcement. The kind that don't announce itself, but holds everything up when others try to tear it down. There came a moment when I had to speak the boundary out loud. He had been enforcing it silently for weeks, rejecting uninvited visits, refusing to accept detoured apologies, ignoring guilt-laced texts. But eventually, words were necessary. He looked my wife in the eye and said it clearly, "Your father is no longer welcome here." Her face stiffened. "Not forever," I added. "Until I receive a complete, sincere apology. Until he sits down and truly takes responsibility, not just for the check, but for the pattern." Long silence. Her lips parted to ask a question, then stopped. She knew it wasn't a debate, it was a declaration. He wasn't expecting her to choose sides. He was asking her to acknowledge what dignity looked like. "What happens if he refuses?" she asked. He breathed deeply. "Then he stays outside the door." Simple. She didn't fight me. She didn't exactly agree either. But later that week, he called her, asked to stop by, and she told him it wasn't a good time. The world didn't explode. Nobody collapsed. Boundaries didn't destroy the family, they just exposed which parts were unwilling to grow. For the first time, I felt control over who could emotionally access me. He stopped showing up to family events where he was present. When asked why, I answered calmly, "Respect is a requirement, not a suggestion." People rolled their eyes. Whispered. Avoided the topic. But they also stopped testing me, because I didn't blink. That was the trick. Not anger. Not chaos. Consistency. Boundaries backed by consistency become walls that protect, not cages that isolate. It wasn't vengeance. It was healing through clarity. And I didn't need anyone else's permission to protect my peace anymore. As autumn set in, the space between my wife and me grew quieter. Not colder, just quieter. The difference is silence that saves is a silence that separates. A kind of emotional pause. We both felt it but didn't name it. She was caught between obligation and observation, watching me become someone stronger, but unsure her loyalty could stretch that far. We agreed on small things, groceries, bills, routines. But deep down, we were on two different floors of the same house. He suggested therapy, gently. She shrugged it off, until one night, after a long silence at dinner, she said, "Maybe we should talk to someone." That was a small win. Not for the marriage, necessarily, but for the truth we both knew was rising between us. We went. We sat in that room with neutral walls and a third person who didn't take sides. For the first time, she heard herself speak the words he'd long known were buried in her. I was scared, she admitted. Scared to push back against him. Scared what it would cost us. He nodded. I was scared too, I said. But silence was costing me more. Sessions continued. So me good. So me tense. We didn't magically fix everything. But we started telling the truth, not just about her father, but about the patterns he left behind. His voice had echoed in the way she handled discomfort, boundaries, expectations. Mine had shrunk every time I abandoned self-worth for the illusion of peace. We were either going to build something new, or let the old walls crack beneath us. He didn't know the outcome yet. But I knew this, he'd rather walk alone in truth than sleep beside someone still making excuses for people who committed harm under the disguise of family. This winter came clarity. He looked around my life, now half rebuilt, partially scarred, and saw something new taking shape, integrity. Not perfection. Not revenge. Used solid ground under my feet. He began using my voice in quiet ways. On a blog. In small posts. Anonymous at first, but eventually, I signed my name. Not to drag anyone. Not to name-drop pain. But to say, this happens. And that is how I found my balance. The response was slow, then steady. People reached out. Thanked me. So me just tapped same. I started volunteering, helping others learn how to document mistreatment, how to file for benefits safely, how to navigate toxic households as disabled individuals. I wasn't a professional. But experience makes you fluent in survival. And survival shared becomes support. My check came in regularly now. The paper wasn't the point anymore, it was the principle. That I was whole, whether they believed it or not. That I contributed, even if I didn't take clock in that my worth was not measured by a boss or a father-in-law. He spoke with my legal advisor less frequently now. But I still kept that file up to date. Not because I was preparing for war. But because peace has better footing when protected by preparation. And for the first time, I truly believed, I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to live guided by the knowledge that I had already faced down shame, and said, no more. The loudest man in the room once told me I wasn't a real man. But day by day, I was becoming the kind I could finally respect. That mattered more. The next family gathering came 6 months later. I debated skipping it but went. Not for him, for closure. I walked in calm. Stronger. My posture was different. My presence was silent but grounded. He was there, across the room, holding court like always. Laughing loudly, inserting opinions where none were needed. Our eyes met briefly. No words exchanged. And then, exactly like fate had planned it, someone made a harmless joke about expenses. Taxes. Disability benefits. Suddenly, like clockwork, he grinned and said, well, some folks still living off the government, right? It wasn't the aim. Used thrown into the air like bait. He didn't flinch. He stood up. Steady. Not loud. I looked him directly in the eyes, and said, a real man respects other people's seasons. You taught me that, by showing me what not to be. The room went still. That was it. He sat back down. Nothing more. Not a sermon. Not a scene. Used truths. Clean and calm. Scoffed, of course. Snorted something to deflect. But the room didn't laugh with him this time. And that told me everything. He had changed, and like it or not, they saw it. He didn't need applause. He didn't want vindication. What I wanted, and I already had. Integrity. Peace. And power that couldn't be ripped in half like paper. The man who once tried to humiliate me in front of family had become his own kind of lesson. And I had become something better than he ever expected, not a man who fought for pride, but a man who walked away with dignity intact. That's who I am now. That's who I'll always be. Sometimes, the real victory is not letting yourself lose, even if the other person wins with a lie. If you've ever felt something like this, please let me know in the comments. I read every comment. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. Don't forget to share it with someone close to you, they might need to hear it too. And if you want to hear more such real stories, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.